January 14th, 1979, a quiet house in Queens, New York. Tommy DeSimone walked out the front door, climbed into a car with two men he trusted, and vanished without a trace. He was only 28 years old. Tommy believed he was on his way to the ceremony that would finally make him a made man in the Lucchese crime family. Instead, he was heading straight to his execution. His body was never found. In the Mafia, some debts are paid in silence. Tommy's disappearance wasn't just another gangland murder. He was one of the three men responsible for the brutal killing of Billy Batts, the infamous murder later immortalized in Goodfellas. Yet 9 years after Batts was beaten to death, only Tommy paid the ultimate price. Jimmy Burke lived for years before dying in prison, and Henry Hill survived long enough to tell his story to the world. So why was Tommy the only one marked for death? The answer has less to do with revenge than most people think. The Mafia survives by removing threats to its own stability, and by 1979, Tommy DeSimone had become the biggest threat of all. To understand why Tommy had to die, you first have to understand who he really was. Long before Hollywood turned him into an unforgettable character, Tommy was already building a terrifying reputation. Born in Massachusetts in 1950 and raised in a family with deep organized crime connections, violence was part of his world from the beginning. As a teenager, he was introduced to powerful Lucchese captain Paul Vario, where he met another young associate named Henry Hill. Together they stole trucks, hijacked cargo, and earned money for the family. But Tommy quickly stood apart for one reason: he simply couldn't control himself. Henry Hill later admitted that Joe Pesci's portrayal in Goodfellas captured Tommy's personality almost perfectly, except for one detail. The real Tommy wasn't short. He stood over 6 feet tall, heavily built, and physically intimidating. He loved using that size to dominate people, and unlike most mobsters, he didn't need a business reason to become violent. A bad look, a joke, or even boredom could be enough. According to Hill, Tommy committed his first murder at only 17 years old, killing a stranger without any real motive. It was an early warning of what he would become. A man who didn't kill for profit or survival, but because violence had become part of who he was. By 1970, Tommy was a trusted earner for Paul Vario's crew, making money through hijackings at JFK Airport while gaining a dangerous reputation on the streets. Then came the mistake that sealed his fate forever. On June 11, Billy Batts, a made member of the Gambino crime family, celebrated his release from prison at the Sweet Lounge in Queens. Years earlier, Batts remembered Tommy as a teenage shoeshine boy, and in front of everyone he mocked him with the famous line, "Go get your shine box." Under Mafia rules, Tommy was expected to swallow the insult because Batts outranked him. Instead, he waited until the bar emptied, returned with Jimmy Burke and Henry Hill, and attacked Batts with unbelievable brutality. Tommy pistol whipped him, Jimmy joined the beating, and Henry helped move the barely conscious Batts into a car trunk. Hours later, they drove him to an isolated area where Tommy repeatedly stabbed him while Jimmy finished him with gunshots before burying the body. Months later, they secretly dug up the corpse and buried it again, hoping the crime would stay hidden forever. It didn't. Killing a made man without permission was one of the worst crimes imaginable in the Mafia, especially when that made man belonged to another family. From that moment forward, Tommy wasn't simply a violent associate, he was a walking problem that eventually had to be solved. Most people think the Billy Batts murder alone earned Tommy his death sentence. But that wasn't the whole story. Instead of becoming cautious after crossing the Mafia's biggest line, Tommy became even more reckless. Later that same year, he shot a young associate nicknamed Spider in the foot, simply for entertainment. Spider survived, returned to work weeks later, and after making a sarcastic remark, Tommy calmly shot him several times in front of everyone. There was no business reason, no betrayal, and no profit. Spider died because Tommy couldn't control his temper. Years later, Henry Hill admitted that was the moment he truly realized Tommy was a psychopath. Soon another Gambino-connected associate, Ronald Foxy Giroth, was murdered by Tommy under circumstances that remain unclear. Now, Tommy wasn't responsible for one unauthorized Gambino killing. He was connected to multiple. Every murder created more enemies, more unwanted attention, and more pressure on the Lucchese family to deal with him. By the mid-1970s, Tommy had become both an excellent earner and a massive liability. His reputation frightened civilians, worried fellow gangsters, and angered rival families. The Gambinos never forgot what he had done. They simply waited for the right opportunity. That opportunity arrived after the legendary Lufthansa heist in December 1978. Jimmy Burke masterminded one of the biggest robberies in American history, stealing millions of dollars in cash and jewelry from JFK Airport. Tommy participated alongside several other associates, but the robbery created another problem. Jimmy began eliminating anyone who might connect him to the crime, leaving bodies scattered across New York. Within months, nearly everyone tied to the heist was dead. Curiously, Tommy wasn't one of Jimmy's victims. He didn't need to be, because another death sentence had already been approved. Early in 1979, Tommy was told that his long-awaited induction ceremony had finally arrived. Becoming a made man had always been his dream. He dressed for the occasion, climbed into a car with trusted associates, and expected to enter the Mafia's inner circle. Instead, he walked into a trap. According to multiple Mafia sources, he entered a house expecting a room filled with Lucchese members, only to realize it was empty except for the men waiting to kill him. Whether the trigger was pulled by John Gotti, Tommy Agro, or another Gambino hitman remains debated. But the result never changed. Tommy DeSimone disappeared forever, and with his death the Lucchese family restored peace with the Gambinos by sacrificing the one associate they could no longer defend. Tommy's execution raises one obvious question. If he, Jimmy Burke, and Henry Hill all participated in Billy Bat's murder, why was Tommy the only one who died? The answer lies in how the Mafia weighs value, risk, and survival. Jimmy Burke was one of the most profitable criminals the Lucchese family had. He planned complex robberies, generated millions of dollars, and knew how to stay useful. More importantly, Jimmy wasn't Italian. Because of his Irish heritage, he could never become a made man, which placed him outside certain internal Mafia rules. While the Gambino family certainly hated his role in Batz's murder, demanding his execution would have created unnecessary conflict with the Lucchese's over one of their most valuable earners. Jimmy also handled himself far differently than Tommy. He avoided unnecessary attention, rarely acted on impulse, and treated murder as business rather than entertainment. Tommy killed because he enjoyed it. Jimmy killed only when he believed it protected his interests. That difference made Jimmy dangerous, but still manageable. In the Mafia, controllable criminals are assets. Uncontrollable ones eventually become expendable. Henry Hill survived for an entirely different reason. Like Jimmy, he could never become a made man because he was only half Italian. He wasn't the man who insulted Billy Batts, started the fight, or delivered the fatal wounds. He helped move the body and cover up the crime. But he wasn't viewed as the driving force behind it. Compared to Tommy, Henry was a supporting player rather than the main target. When federal investigators arrested him on drug charges in 1980, Henry made the decision that changed Mafia history forever. Rather than spend the rest of his life behind bars, he agreed to cooperate with the government. His testimony exposed Paul Vario, Jimmy Burke, and dozens of other organized crime figures, leading to numerous convictions and giving the public one of the most detailed looks inside the Mafia ever recorded. Henry entered the witness protection program and eventually inspired the story that became Goodfellas. Although he was later removed from witness protection after repeatedly breaking the rules, the Mafia never came after him. By then, the damage had already been done. Killing Henry wouldn't erase his testimony, it would only attract more law enforcement attention. To the Mafia, he simply wasn't worth the risk anymore. The truth is that Tommy DeSimone represented everything the Mafia feared in one person. He ignored the chain of command, murdered without permission, drew constant attention from police, and repeatedly created conflicts with other crime families. Every time Paul Vario protected him, Tommy responded by causing another disaster. The murder of Billy Batts was already enough to spark a deadly dispute with the Gambinos, but Tommy refused to learn from it. Instead, he continued killing, intimidating, and acting as though no rules applied to him. Eventually, even the men who once protected him realized there was only one solution. Sacrificing Tommy would satisfy the Gambinos, prevent a larger war, and eliminate an associate who had become impossible to control. From the Mafia's perspective, it wasn't personal, it was business. Tommy's death also served another purpose. It reminded every associate and every made man that nobody was above the organization itself. Reputation meant nothing if you endangered the family. Loyalty meant nothing if your actions threatened peace between powerful crime groups. Even the toughest enforcer could be replaced if he became more trouble than he was worth. Tommy believed his fearsome reputation would make him untouchable. Instead, it guaranteed that no one would risk protecting him. The fake induction ceremony was the perfect trap because it exploited his greatest ambition. He spent years dreaming of becoming a made man, only to discover that the invitation was actually his death warrant. Jimmy Burke and Henry Hill understood the game better than Tommy ever did. Jimmy stayed valuable by making money and keeping his emotions under control, while Henry ultimately chose survival over loyalty by cooperating with federal authorities. Tommy did neither. He confused violence with power and believed fear alone could protect him. In reality, fear only made him a liability. Once the Gambino family demanded justice, the Lucases didn't hesitate. They chose the future of the organization over the future of one reckless associate. That's the real story behind Goodfellas. It's not just a tale about money, robbery, or gangland violence. It's the story of what happens when someone mistakes brutality for strength. Tommy DeSimone wasn't executed simply because he helped kill Billy Batts. He died because, over the next 9 years, he proved again and again that he could never be trusted to follow the rules. The Mafia doesn't survive by rewarding chaos, it survives by eliminating it. Tommy climbed into that car believing he was finally about to achieve his lifelong dream. Instead, he unknowingly drove toward the lesson that defines organized crime better than anything else. Nobody is untouchable. In the end, Jimmy Burke lived because he remained valuable. Henry Hill lived because he escaped the life. And Tommy DeSimone died because he became the one problem the Mafia could no longer afford to keep alive. If you want more deep dives into the hidden world of the American Mafia, subscribe now and don't miss the next story.